So Dave, you're in the new studio now. You're living it up.
Living it up, but Brad, I got to tell you, I want to talk for just a brief second before we start the show about the great lie that is internet service in America.
They didn't tell you the truth, did they?
No, it's all a bag of lies. It's a bag of lies. It's like every weight loss program you've ever been on. Okay, so the thing that I was so excited about with this move, like more excited than anything else, is that this street, the new one that I'm moving onto, or have moved onto, has AT&T fiber. Yeah. And for those of you that know, fiber is the optical. It's light. The internet's traveling on light, and so it's supposed to be 100 times faster than your average service. And so I was very excited. I was like, oh man, fiber optic internet, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to make toast with this. It's going to be so good. And I get in here and the whole thing works like a pile of shit. It's like nothing works. Nothing works. Well, if you actually plug into the Ethernet in the house, then the fiber works great, right? Like the Ethernet itself is fine. That's great. But the router that AT&T forces you to use for Wi-Fi, you go from internet optical speeds down to like dial-up in 1999. Really? And it's like, I don't know what's wrong with their Wi-Fi router and why it's so terrible. Like, if you're going to, force people to use a Wi-Fi router, then make it a good one. Like this one, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated, Brad.
I hear voice.
I was so excited about going to fiber, and then the router, it's basically like, you know what it is? Okay, I'm going to put it in terms of movers. Like, let's say movers had brought in this couch and they hired 4 of the most ripped guys you've ever seen, right? And so that's the fiber coming into the house. It's like 4 huge movers, like, here's your couch. But then they hire a guy that's like, his name is Melvin and he's 40 pounds. They pass the couch to that guy at the door and they're like, here you go. And, those guys buffly walk off, and then Melvin's like, I'm having trouble with this couch. I don't know that I can get this couch past the door frame. And that's what my router is. Like, AT&T has laid thousands of miles of fiber optic cable, and the internet is streaming at the speed of light. And then it gets to my house, and it gets to this router, and it goes, I'm having troubles.
Luckily, there's a place for me to sit down.
Yeah. Do you have a glass of lemonade that I could rest for a moment?
Excuse me.
Very hard to run
trouble
this
you
internet.
for a glass of
Anyway,
water.
on that note, hi everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about being frustrated about your new internet and making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Strip.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab.
You know what? Before we do anything else, you got to give me an update on the Kickstarter. How's it
going? Well, by the time people hear this show, it will be over. Although, because I use BackerKit, you can still pre-order. But I surpassed my mental high point. The Kickstarter was for 10,000. Last night we crossed over 15,000. And as you well know, you make most of your money in Kickstarter on the first couple of days and on the last couple of days. So I'm very, very honored, flattered, over the moon at the support my readers have shown. This thing will be over at 11 o'clock Wednesday morning. And now it's just getting the book out, the fun part. The Kickstarter hangover, where it's like you wake up from a wild party and then you start going, oh my God, I promised what?
Suddenly, Brad, you became Melvin at the doorframe being passed the couch.
I think I was going to do how many artist editions?
Why did I agree to the special printing? That seems expensive.
Oh.
Well, for those that are listening to this after the Kickstarter ends, you can still find the links and all the things you need at newevilbook.com, I would imagine.
That's
Brad,
correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And as soon as the payments process and we get started, you'll be able to pre-order the book right at that same place. And it'll be great fun.
And I should mention, since we to put a button on our earlier BackerKit conversation from a couple weeks ago, that to Backer Kit's great credit, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, you know what? We would like to have that beer with you." And so I have to give them credit because that was not me at my nicest, and they were very kind and reached out and said, "We would like to have a beer with you at a comic convention or something one time and talk shop." So I think I will do that with them. I haven't responded yet, only because I've been knee deep in a move, but I will reach out to them and say thank you because that is a kindness.
Yeah, they're. I think if you take that meeting, you'll find that they're very, very nice people.
Well, this again goes to one of the central problems of my life is the rare times when I am a jerk. I immediately feel guilty and regret that I did anything. So a lot of people are like, "Boy, Dave, you're so happy-go-lucky and nice most of the time." And it's because I feel terrible anytime I'm a jerk. Like, it never goes well for me to be a jerk. I'm always like, "No, I made a bad move there."
Well, you weren't a jerk. And as a matter of fact, you did that riff where you're like, "Hey, Dave, it's me, Tim. Hey, it's me, Gloria, just following up. Hey, it's me, Phil." And they picked right up on that. And they're like, "Okay, hey, Dave, this is Gary. And I don't think this is Phil or or anybody else."
Yeah, that's right. They did make a good joke out of it. So kudos to Backer Kit for being for both being good-hearted and well-timed in the joke and emailing back. So for what that's worth, I give them many points for that. So that is that for me on the Backer end thing. So I will be following up with them.
Yeah,
for beer.
well, that'll actually be good because I'd like to hear your thoughts on that when you do, because like you said, the big thing that happens with the Kickstarter now is that on Thursday after this thing is done, I'm going to hear from my first reader that says, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know about the Kickstarter." And the big benefit there is I can say, "Well, hey, good news for you. In a couple days, the site's going to be set up and you can pre-order the book."
Oh, so I actually didn't know this. So does it take you a couple days to set up a follow-up Backer Kit page?
What happened? Okay. Well, see, since they get a part of your Kickstarter money as their down payment, you've got to wait until the Kickstarter money is collected, and that usually takes 2 weeks. So once all the money is collected, you can start setting up your store at the same time you're taking orders and so forth. And yeah, it's the perfect answer to those people who are latecomers to the Kickstarter, because you can just say, "Yep, it's going to be all set up in a matter of a couple weeks, and if you want, I'll drop you an email when everything is ready."
Well, that's fantastic. So newevilbook.com is your link for following up with Brad if you missed the Kickstarter. And I'm excited to see that book.
So, well, listen, Dave, we've got some questions from our $5 level Patreon backers. There's some really good topics there that I think we can dig into. You want to give it a shot?
Let's dive right in, my friend.
So here's one that is actually we've been holding on to for a little while that I've been wanting to get to. And I'm putting it right at the top of the show today. You both do story and character-based comics. How sustainable do you think an online gag comic is?
An online gag comic, I would say, is about 20 years sustainable, based on my current experience with Sheldon. That's my short
You think
answer.
Maybe do you have any resources that you could point to that could show why you think that an online gag comic could last for about 20 years?
My new house. That's the resource. That's the resource that I could point to.
Oh my gosh. This really is. So I looked at that question and I'm like, surely he knows that we both have considerable experience doing gag comics, and that we for the longest time I considered Evil Inc. to be a gag comic. Sheldon for certain is a gag comic. And I think maybe there's something deeper there.
Well, a gag comic in its traditional form. Let's do definitions first, because that might be helpful. I would define a gag comic as non-storyline based joke-a-day comic, whether it's panel or comic strip. Is that how you would describe a gag comic?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So that's everything from The Far Side to BC to, we can name some more. What's another non-storyline?
Yeah, just about every comic that you see in the newspaper. Peanuts, Garfield, Drabble. Yeah. If you remember Drabble, I was a huge Drabble fan for about a summer.
Oh my God! You know what? There was a window where I really did love Drabble. Yes, I will agree with you on that.
Stuff. And then you've got your single panel comics like Herman and The Far Side and
Ballard
Also
Street.
that Loose Parts by Dave Blazik.
Oh yeah, Speed Bumps.
Speed Bumps is brilliant too.
Yeah, I don't know why I want to go back on this, but the gag comics do allow for an occasional storyline. So that's, you can have a 1 week, 2 week storyline. Like occasionally BC will have the caveman contemplating the birth of Jesus Christ, which is really, really odd as a storyline. Talk about not going with your original pitch, don't you? Like whenever I see that, I'm like, what's happening, BC? What's going on?
It's right there in the title, Before Christ. If you're ever questioning, hey, what's my concept here? Should I work in some Christianity? Just look right there at the top of your comic. BC.
Oh my God.
Underline
Brad,
B.
can I tell you, in my mind, I never made the joke that it's in the title. It's in the title, Before Christ, and you're making Jesus comments in your oh my God, that's amazing, Brad. I never made the BC joke.
Well, clearly neither did Johnny Hart.
And oh my God, listen, and I want to say this because it's worth pointing out. There's nothing wrong with inserting your faith or Christianity into a comic. It's just weird when your faith takes place before it could have happened. Like you have cavemen. You can't do that. You have to create a second comic. Like that doesn't work. Oh, it just bothered me. It always bothered me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it felt shoehorned too. Frankly, I mean,
shoehorned. Brad. The comic takes place 20,000 years before Jesus was born. That's not even shoehorning. That's like throwing out any form of timeline. Oh my God. Oh, shoehorning.
But yeah, it went to your central point. A gag comic can have a storyline, but the whole idea of a gag comic is that it's all about the joke. It's all about the gag, not so much about the story. And that's where this questioner. I'm not going to say question asker.
Questioner! You said it. I'm really proud of you.
This questioner probably is right. I don't have as much experience doing gag comics as you do. Because I did heavy storyline stuff. My closest to a true gag comic would have been Courting Disaster, which was a comic that I did to accompany a sex advice column in a newspaper. But Sheldon, without a doubt, is a gag comic. And in fact, it's such a gag comic, in certain days, none of your characters show up. It could be a Vulcan one day, and then, hey, guess what? We're talking about Vulcans today. And tomorrow it could be William Shakespeare, and the next day it could be an animal. Your Sheldon is all about the gag, and you've been doing it for 20 years. And so I think it's fairly sustainable.
Yeah. And a couple of thoughts on this. So the first thing, that idea about, one day it contains a Vulcan, one day it contains me, one day it contains the strips from the characters from the strip.
Yeah.
That is an angle that because I want to give credit where credit's due. That's an angle that I got from Mike Peters with Mother Goose and Grimm. And Mother Goose and Grimm, for those that don't know it, mainly revolves around, is it a witch and her dog? Is that what it is?
Dave, it's right there in the title. The old woman is Mother Goose.
Oh, God bless America.
Goose, for Christ's sake. And then the
Goose,
dog is Grimm.
Oh, Broomhilda was the one with the witch. Sorry.
Yes, yeah, she was the one with the broom. And
oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting this wrong. Anyway.
Do I need to break it to you that Funky Winkerbean isn't like a weird dance move? That was the name of the teenage boy. His nickname was Funky.
Funky Winkerbean was about STDs, wasn't it?
Yeah, I got a bad case of the Funky Winkerbean.
Hey, Doc, can you take a look at my Winkerbean? It's looking a little funky.
Funky?
My Winkerbean is not looking so good these days. Oh, God, that is funky. Oh, God bless. My Winker and my beans are looking a little troubled. Oh, yeah, that's oh, my God. I have red hot cheeks from that. All right, so Mike Peters' Mother Goose and Grimm, which, as we all know, was about cavemen, Mother Goose and Grimm would do this thing where Grimmy, the dog, would still kind of appear in every comic in like a corner of the panel, just like letting you know that it was still Mother Goose and Grimm. But sometimes he would do a joke that was super far afield from the comic strip, and it was a single panel one. Or basically what Mike Peters decided to do was, I can tell, and in fact, I think I asked him one time at an NCS thing, but he was, instead of stopping Mother Goose and Grimm when he got tired of it, he just changed. He's like, I'm going to put whatever the heck I want in when I want it. So that's what I did with Sheldon, where instead of, as I got tired with, 15, 16 years of doing a very specific storyline, I basically gave myself permission to say, you know what, at this point, I've earned it. I'm going to do whatever I want in Sheldon. And no one made a squawk. I mean, occasionally people make a squawk. People like to complain. But for the most part, it continues to work. So,
no, and I think that was the smartest thing you ever did, frankly, was to allow yourself that freedom, because I like the fact that when I go to your site, I don't know what the hell I'm going to see that day. And
neither does my mother.
It could be anything, and I like that about it. And I get it. It's not like I'm sitting there going, "Hey, where's Sheldon? Where's the kid millionaire? Whatever happened to Gramps?" I'm happy when I see Gramps. I'm happy when I see all of those characters. But I'm also thrilled when I look down that page and see a Vulcan.
Yeah, it gives you a little freedom to, and I have to say, there is a way to do that at the start, and so it's possible. But my gut tells me, and Brad, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. My gut tells me that you a little bit have to do a couple years worth of just straight characters and in world comic building before you allow yourself to do that. But maybe I'm wrong. The other person that I know that it self-inserts a lot is Stefan Pastis with Pearls. Shut up. Shut up. I hear you over there. When I said self-inserts.
I didn't say a thing. I'm over here. Pure as the driven snow.
I love when the 10-year-old and you just like, I'm like, here's go quiet for a second. Here's the context. All right, so another cartoonist that self-inserts, and I just hear in the background, like trying so hard to stifle a laugh.
I was trying to behave myself.
Anyway, Stefan Pastis with Pearls Before Swine also has increasingly, in fact, to a heavy degree, put himself in his own comic strip more and more. But he started with a dip of the toe, probably 5 to 8 years into the strip. Yeah. So it's not like it's not like it was a sudden jump in the pool. He did it slowly.
Let's tackle this from a meaningful standpoint. What is the value of a gag comic online? And the answer is probably the most valuable thing that you could be doing. In other words, gag comics are extremely powerful online because they're basically a meme, right? Gag comics is exactly what you need to be doing if you are purposefully trying to excel on the current social media driven landscape. Why? They're standalone. They can easily be read without knowing anything about the backstory. I don't need to know anything about you to get today's comic. All of those things make this something that is extremely shareable, extremely viral worthy, and it's a powerful, powerful thing. If I were talking to this young cartoonist and he says, I don't know whether I should do a gag comic in today's society, I'd be like, okay, not only should you be doing a gag comic, but you should be doing this in such a way that you're sizing it in such a way that it can be easily read on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram without recropping to a noticeable degree. And I can share it, read it, consume it right there on social media. And that is a comic that I think will go far. Do you agree?
They're also very digestible.
Yeah.
And they're easily and quickly digestible, which, think about the scroll on your phone, how quickly you make a snap decision. A gag strip versus a storyline strip is so much more infinitely digestible. It's quick. It's an easy read. You're bing, bang, boom, you're done. And before you know it, you've already shared it with your friends. Right. In some respects, it's easier to grow a gag strip than it is to grow a storyline strip, I would think. I say that as someone who has both a story-based sci-fi comic, Drive, and a gag comic, Sheldon, that Sheldon, I think, is easier to share and to make go viral and to put out into the world than Drive, which I quite frankly don't know how to share my Drive story to a world that makes sense in a digestible form. That is the battle that I'm currently fighting for the last couple of years. It's how to make it easy, aside from word of mouth, for people to go, oh, I would like to try out this long form storyline that's 400 pages deep, whereas it's very easy for me to go, hey, here's a comic for free on Instagram. Oh, and by the way, here's a link back to Sheldon if you want to read more. And that finds a way into thousands of hands before I even can walk out the door. It's great. It's easy to. Now, the downsides are, when you don't have a storyline, you don't have characters that you can build and brand on, and there are a couple aspects of cartooning that can help with. With a storyline, you get people majorly invested emotionally that they don't get from a gag comic. So what I mean by that is people can buy in quick for a gag comic, but a storyline comic will keep them hooked in a way that perhaps a gag comic will not. Would you agree?
No, I agree 100%. There is a trade-off. There's definitely a trade-off.
And so that's why, even though Sheldon has 8, maybe 10 times the size audience that Drive has, Drive is making up 60 to 70% of my income at the moment, because the people that buy in emotionally buy in big time and support the comic. So take that for what you will as far as viability at the moment. But at the same time, in a sense, Drive is still, I don't want to say it's a gag comic, but it's still, humor is still one of its most effective weapons. And that's true with Brad's Evil Inc. as well, is that no matter how heavy we go into storyline, gags are still what powers it most days.
Well, listen, that's why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them. In other words, I'm gonna go back and reference on the Discord server earlier this week. There was somebody saying, I'm doing like a long form comic. I don't know how I should share this on Facebook. He was referencing directly my thoughts about you should be sharing your entire comic on social media so that it can be read there and shared, not necessarily links back. And the conversation kind of took off from the standpoint of, well, Facebook's algorithm, you're getting fewer and fewer people, which, by the way, we're going to put a little asterisk there. We're going to talk deeper about Facebook's algorithm, because I've got news for you. Facebook's algorithm is your friend, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But they were saying, you don't get as many people on Facebook. And somebody said, well, this isn't a one size fits all. And just because, this is something that was said doesn't mean you got to do it, and blah, blah. And all of that is true. All of that is fine. And I'm with you on that. But don't let that be where your thinking ends. In other words, if you're going to say, well, I think this whole idea of putting your entire comic on social media isn't the answer for me, you don't get to roll over and go to sleep now. This is where the real work begins. Now you've got to put your creative mind into gear and say, if I'm not going to do that, how am I going to supplement all of that stuff that I'm missing out on by not doing it? How am I going to overcome that? How am I going to think outside the box and get this thing out there because I've decided I'm not going to do this thing? The real problem is if you get to that point and you just shrug and say, well, I'm just going to update a page a day on my website and that's going to be it. No, the answer is the real thinking has to start, and you've got to come up with that. For me, I decided I've been doing a long form comic now since 2016. And I put a lot of thought into how I do that. Same as you do with Drive, Dave. I know this because I'm basically updating in half-page installments. And at the end of each one of those half pages is a button. It's either a punchline, a cliffhanger, something significant happens, usually a punchline because I'm still doing humor. But there's a reason I do that. That half page is easily shared on social media. That half page is easily digested. In other words, I don't think I do it 100% of the time, but in most cases, you don't need to know the storyline to get drawn into what's happening there and to appreciate that as a singular reading experience. And then when I put those pages together, what I'm finding out now that I'm doing this book is that those pages read phenomenally. Why? Because there's something happening every page. and in many cases, every half page. And that makes for good writing. I do not want to read a story where somebody's rolling over in their sleep for 4 pages, or a boy's falling down the well for 3 pages. I want something to happen in this comic. And doing it that way was my way of making sure that I made sure something was happening, and I could share this on social media. That's how I solved the problem for me. Now, if you're going to decide, well, I don't want to do posting my comic on social media, that's great. Now, tell me what you are going to do to make up for that. That's the big question.
I have to say, the gag comics, I think, as we've probably talked at length on now, are very workable. And I think both from a site perspective, from a social media perspective, from a shareable perspective, and from a monetization perspective, both with product and Patreon and Kickstarter, I can think of a bunch of people like Zach Weinersmith with Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, a bunch of the people that have gone either to Webtoons or to Go Comics or to a lot of the newer platforms, or look at some of the Instagram stars in comics. So many of them are gag comics. So I think the final button we can put on this is, if that's where your heart is, rest assured you can make a career out of that with all of the right moves that we would normally advise.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very viable. So let's move on to question number 2. When posting, how do you feel about hashtags? How many, which ones, and direct requests for interaction in the description? For example, tag a friend who does blah, 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 or please repost and like, comments and likes appreciated. Those are all calls to action. So let's take those in 2 stages. How do we feel about hashtags, and how do we feel about direct calls to action on social media?
Well, okay, so my immediate reaction is that I always have to be careful with something like hashtags, because I have to be wary of the fact that even though I don't personally use hashtags to seek things out online, that is a form of, in some respects, mirror marketing that I think that I'm trying to pitch to an audience that's me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from both peers and friends that there are people that actively use hashtags to search and discover things. So with Instagram especially, because it allows for 30 hashtags, and frankly, it's a less annoying platform to add hashtags than it would be for Twitter or Facebook, because they're kind of hidden down in the comments if you do it in the first comment. I use all 30 spots for Instagram, and I think I've told you this, Brad. What I've done is I've actually created, because Instagram, you have to get your comics onto the phone, and then you have to put them on Instagram from your phone. Well, what I've done is I've synced up my Dropbox account so that my phone can grab that folder easily, and then within that folder is a text edit file that just has 10 or 15 different examples of hashtag groupings. So if I do a coffee strip or a pug strip or a sci-fi strip, each one of those would have a separate group of 30 hashtags that I copy and paste. I don't even have to think about it. And it's right there on Dropbox. And then I go back to Instagram, boom, I got 30 hashtags ready to go, right? And I got to tell you, it's immeasurable in terms of how much time saving that gives me. And so do I have to modify it each time there's a strip? Maybe I'll take the last 4 or 5 hashtags and redo them to make it more specific to that strip. But you get the main point, is that the hashtags are ready to go, and bing, bang, boom, and I paste them in there. Now with Twitter, both because it's more visually annoying and because it is much more character limited in terms of, what is it now, 280, that I don't tend to use hashtags on Twitter aside from making a joke like hashtag Bieber or something. But maybe I should. I don't know. What is your answer to the hashtag question, Brad?
I've got lots of thoughts on hashtags, mainly because I detest hashtags. I absolutely despise them.
We're just 2 old men over here. Yeah. I don't like hashtags.
And so what I did was I started kind of trying to research them a little bit. It became that like an itch I couldn't scratch. And I became a little bit obsessed with it over the last couple of weeks. And here's what I found. I'm finding a lot of sources. Now, of course, again, when we're talking about algorithms, nobody knows exactly how the algorithm of any social media works, because then it would be easy to game the system. But I have found a number of sources that repeat that more than 7 hashtags on Instagram get sent down in the algorithm. In other words, that message gets deflated a little bit. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I have been trying to limit myself to about 7 so that I can see how that works.
Well, now I have no in on whether how the algorithm works, obviously, but all I can say is that I use all 30, and like it's kind of an in for a penny, in for a pound. If they allow for 30, I use all 30, and the growth on Instagram has been amazing. So
well, listen, listening or watching your Instagram followers versus mine, I would go for 30 rather than 7 because you're tearing it up over there.
I'm not saying that I have no in on the algorithm. I don't know what it does, but I just say it seems to not have hurt me to use all 30.
That's true.
So for what
now, Facebook, on the other hand, definitely from everything I read, Facebook does not like hashtags and will penalize hashtags. So I try not to use hashtags on Facebook at all. Twitter, they build hashtags right in. And that's, when you see the trending things over there on the trending column, they actively say, yeah, we want you to use hashtags. So I will use hashtags there. But here's the real problem with hashtags from my point of view. And that is so many of us are using knee-jerk, thoughtless, lazy hashtags. And what happens is you end up reading a comic on social media and then a whole chain of hashtags like, hey, here's one, I just found some that I just recently. Webcomics, comic, comics, superhero, superheroine. Here's another one. Make comics, making comics, indie comics, webcomics, illustration, illustrator. And here's my point. I think a couple of those would probably be just fine. But, Dave, look at this one. Here are some hashtag quick hashtag sketches of one of our hashtag upcoming hashtag webcomics, hashtag character, Tom.
Hashtag no.
Holy fucking shit. Who does now? Here's the problem. Here's why that's lazy and knee jerk, because you haven't put any thought into how people use hashtags. No one is going to put the word upcoming into a hashtag search. You dummy. I can see somebody putting webcomic into a search. I can see somebody putting making comics into a search. No one's putting quick into a hashtag search. So think about what your comic is about. That should be your hashtag. The subject matter, the concept. If you're doing a comic about pugs, you bet you need hashtag pug and hashtag dogs in there. If you're doing a comic about Vulcans, you bet you need hashtag Vulcan and hashtag Star Trek in there. Those are good hashtags. But lazy knee-jerk hashtags is like, Dave, have you ever been at a comic convention and you're next to the guy who spends the entire, and it's usually a guy. I'm not being, I am specifically saying this is usually a male tendency, stands there with his comic in his hand and barks at everybody that walks by. Do you like comics? Do you like comics? Do you like to laugh? The most laziest, low-level marketing pitch in the world. Do you like
nothing
comics?
Nothing like going to a Comic-Con and going, "Hey, you like comics?"
Right?
Excuse me, are you into pop culture?
Yeah. It's like comics could be. Peanuts is a comic, and Deadpool is a comic. But the person that likes one, it might not like the other so much, and vice versa. There's different. There are different audiences for that stuff. You need to, in the same way that you don't want to be that person.
Excuse me, do you like all of the sequential arts?
Now, having said that, and how much I hate hashtags, just recently I had a post that went, for me, super viral. And this is to a normal person, maybe they wouldn't blink at it, but I got a lot of play on this. And it was when Easter fell on April 1st. And I tweeted, I let the boys search for Easter eggs for about 20 minutes before I admitted I didn't hide them this year. Easter only falls on April 1st so often. And people were reacting to that in a big way. And I realized that if I had hashtagged that Easter Sunday, which was trending all day Sunday, I would have tapped into a much bigger audience. The people who were scrolling down that trending list would have seen that and I would have gotten a much bigger play. And when you've got your Kickstarter in your Twitter profile and you've got a Patreon pinned tweet and so forth, having new people looking in on your Twitter is a really, really good thing. And I completely dropped the ball. So I've been just in the last couple of weeks experimenting with using smart hashtags better, or perhaps since smart now has a new meaning, using hashtags more wisely. And I've been getting tremendous response from it, and a lot of people sharing that, and a lot of people stumbling upon my comics and stuff that wouldn't have otherwise. I think hashtags can be super powerful, but you got to put a little thought into them.
So Brad covered this perfectly, so I won't add much to it. My one button before we go to the next question is, in terms of hashtags effectiveness, do you guys remember a week or two ago where Brad was talking about it's actually better to have a smaller audience that's more concentrated and more devoted? So think about that when you think about hashtags, because yes, you do want broad hashtags like webcomics, comic, especially on Instagram where you can have 30. But one of the great things about hashtags on Instagram is that you type out the hashtag comics, it tells you 1 million people have shared this hashtag. You type out webcomics, it tells you 300,000 people have shared that hashtag. You type out gag webcomics, it tells you that 100,000 people have shared that hashtag. So you can actually define a mix of broad and specific hashtags. So for example, whenever I do a pug comic strip, if I do pugs, that gets 15, if I do hashtag that word pugs, it gets 15 million shares or whatever. Not me, just in terms of broad use. But if I do something like hashtag squishy face dogs, it gets 10,000 people. But you can be damn sure that someone that's typing for the hashtag squishy face dogs knows exactly what they're searching for. And that is a very specific audience that will like a pug comic.
And that's a brilliant hashtag. Now that's a smart use of a hashtag, squishy face dog. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
So that's what I'm saying. Specificity and greater detail, drilling down to basically the core audience for who would be, whatever the idea your comic of the day or the comic that you want to share crystallizes. Don't go broad, or if you do, mix it in with ones that go very specific, because the very specific ones are the ones that will pay off.
Yeah.
It's exactly a version of Brad's comment from the other day that you do want to slough off the readers that are casual. You want to get to the core readers that really love what you do, and that's what specific hashtags will gain you. So anyway, that's my button on that conversation.
Well, I'm going to put a button on your button real quick. This almost should go to ProTips.
I'm going to have to go to the doctor for a funky Winkerbean if you put a button on my button.
Well, this'll be real quick. This'll just be a shot. Here's what I've been doing. You know how you use writing prompts to kind of do a little warm up when you're gonna start writing something. A lot of people who are trying to get better at writing use writing prompts to kind of get their creative juices going. I've found something that I've started doing that I really kind of like, and it's a kill two birds with one stone thing that I even like more. I've been using Twitter's trending hashtags as a writing prompt in the morning. So it'll be like, as I'm just kind of getting in and kind of warming up and getting my brain into motion. Here's one. Hashtag bad yoga mantras. Now, that's a great writing prompt. And especially if you're trying to do humor, that's one that you can spend 20 minutes on. Just kind of thinking, okay, what would the worst yoga mantra be? So the object is to come up with something good and just kind of, this is a warm up for your creative brain. Write something, post it under that trending hashtag. And if you do well, number one, at the very least, you've got your creative brain kicking on all cylinders now. And you get a few people that discover your Twitter feed along the way because you've jumped into a hashtag that is trending and you've got a lot of eyeballs there. So it's kind of a nice little kill two birds with one stone thing.
That is a fun idea.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
That's a good one. All right, so let's go on to question number 3, Bradley J.
Here's our questioner that says, I'm so good at this questioner. He says, long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm wondering what you two think is the minimum update frequency necessary to build a consistent audience. I love that thought process. Just tell me the bare minimum I got to do. Give me the minimum update frequency to get some people looking at this thing. I'm sure that's not what he means. He means, as many of us, we've only got so much time in the day. If I'm doing only one a week, am I failing? Am I doing two? Should I be doing two a week? What do you think, Dave? What's the minimum update frequency?
Boy, this is tricky. I'm rare that I'm going to do this, but I'm going to throw it back at you. I want you to go first and me to bounce off your ideas because I'm not sure how I would respond to this right away. Go ahead, you go first.
If you're doing a comic that's not so great, your minimum update frequency is 6 days a week. If you're doing a comic that's fantastic, your minimum update frequency is maybe once a week or once a month. And that's the answer.
Wow. Can I tell you, that was the thought that I had, but I didn't want to say it because I was like, that's a jerk answer. I was going to say, if you're great, do it whenever you want. Yeah. If you're not great, you got to do it more frequently.
Yeah. It's the difference between serving hamburgers every day or steaks a couple times a week. If you are putting out really good stuff, and I know that's a little unfair. All right. I don't know if I'm doing good stuff until 5 years later when I look at it and I forgot what I wrote. Or forgot what I wrote, and it's new to me, right? So I understand that's a little bit unfair, but it's also the truth. If you're doing good work, you are going to get people following you, and they're going to love to see the next thing when it comes out, whenever it comes out.
Right.
If you're not playing the quality game, now you got to play the quantity game. And now you're doing this from a completely different standpoint. You've got to be putting out stuff so regularly that people get into the habit of reading it and habit of looking at it and habit of looking for it. That's the game you've got to play. Now, most of us, especially if we're starting out, we got to find a happy middle in there. We're not doing fantastic work and we're not doing terrible work. We're not able to do 6 days a week, but if we do once a week or fewer, then we know we're going to start to lose people. I think you've got to find whatever balance that you can deliver your level of quality consistently as frequently as possible. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great answer. And the one follow-up I would put on this before we go on to the next question is, by playing the quantity game, if you feel like, well, maybe I'm not where I want to be yet, by playing the quantity game, you also get to the quality game faster.
Absolutely.
And by that, I mean, if you're doing 4 to 6 a week, eventually you can't, as Brad always says, you can't get worse at something that you do every day. Right. So if you're playing the quantity game, which is the smart way to start, you're going to get better and better such that you can drop the quantity and up the quality. And I think that is a long-term strategy for any cartoonist in their first decade, which is start with quantity as much as you can do, because if nothing else, it's a public crucible of you putting it out there regularly and getting better and better. And then as you get better and better, reduce the quantity, reduce the output, but know, because you see it and feel it, that the quality is getting better.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And it's just like we told that Patreon backer last week. What would you rather have looking back? 25 flawed projects or one project that isn't quite there yet? Each one of those projects that you did, each one of those comics that you do, each strip that you do that isn't great gets you one step closer to being great.
In fact, I've often thought about this. So Sheldon has been online since late 1998, mm-hmm. right? So that's 20 years of Sheldon. And I often wonder because, at times you can be both egotistical and then you can be very humble about your own work. And I wonder if at the end of my days, when I'm cold and in the grave, will someone look back and be like, there were 6 really good Sheldons.
Out of the thousands that you've done, they
right. And I don't say that in a falsely humble way or in like, oh, I'm terrible way. I'm wondering if, and maybe, I guess what I'm saying is it's almost a hopeful way. Like maybe that's okay if I did all those thousands to make 6 really truly great comics that were perfect in form. I
see what you're saying. Yeah. In fact, that would be almost a goal to shoot for, where you say, if at the end of my career, if I can point to 6 really good ones, because all those other ones led you to those 6.
Right, right. It's almost like there are some directors for whom they had to make 5 failures to make the one really good film, or
Yeah.
a composer that had to write 20 terrible scores to write one amazing one. I'm like, maybe it might be that in my last decade of cartooning, I'll maybe that'll be my best decade, and people will be like, "Holy crap, look at this work," and I will at that point say, "Yeah, well, it took me 50 years to get to this point," or maybe. Out of the by that point tens of thousands of comics that I will have drawn, there's only 5, 10, 100 really good ones, but I will have produced 5, 10, 100 really good ones. So,
Yeah.
and maybe a few hundred mediocre ones. So that's
that's a good point. Just to bring this one to a close, here's a thought. Remember, your reading public is not consuming media. They're not consuming content the way you might think they are. And we've talked about this before. It's fewer and fewer people who go to a website on a repeated basis to read a comic. Most of those people are reading you on social media. That's how they're getting all of their content. That's where they're getting their news. That's where they're getting their entertainment. They're basically sitting by the side of a stream and dipping into the water every now and again for whatever happens to be floating up that stream. And the good news there for you as a cartoonist who's starting out trying to build an audience is that you're pretty much on the same ground as the rest of us. For the most part, you have just as much opportunity of being seen in that stream today as I do. And if your comic is good, you're going to build a following.
That's a great point, Brad. Yes. And we've seen that happen on Instagram or Twitter, where suddenly someone who is 22, 24, 34, 44, all of a sudden they're flying up the charts on whatever social media platform, because in some respects, the algorithm is an equalizing force in terms of shareability.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, so let's get into question number 4, my friend.
All the way to number 4. We didn't think we were going to make it this far, Dave.
This is amazing.
Okay, this questioner asks, I find my energy tanks really hard, and he had that in all caps, really hard after a convention for a few days. But sales at those shows have been pretty good. Are there any tips for not making conventions so draining or recuperating when you get back?
Okay, so let me jump in on this one because I think I have some thoughts on this. So in my 20s, in my 30s, here's what I would do at conventions. I would go to a convention, fly in, you're already tired, lug all your stuff to the convention, you're already tired, set up your booth, and you're even getting tireder now. Stand on my feet all day long. Oh boy, now I'm really tired. and probably a lot of talking, recycled air, and not drinking water. So I was super dehydrated. Oh, by the way, all the conditions to also get sick. You know, your nasal passages are really dry. Yeah. You're around a lot of other human beings. You're not drinking enough water. So just a recipe for disaster. And then what I would do, and Brad would too, and all of our peers and friends, would go out for beers after dinner and talk shop because, it was a great time to get to know people and to pick up tips and tricks. And so we'd go out for beers. So then after a day of standing on my feet, dehydrated and overly talking, I would then go out at night and have 4 dehydrating beers and do more talking and still be on my feet standing at a bar. And so I would then wake up at whatever ungodly hour in the morning to go to the convention the next day, and I would repeat that cycle for 2, 3, 4 days in a row. And it would just be brutal on my body. So what I learned, and I think this was from Carl Kerschel and Scott Kurtz one year, is they basically declared Emerald City Comic Con old man convention year one year. But anyway, Carl and Scott basically came to the conclusion, they're like, no, I'm older now. I'm not doing this nonsense. I'm going to go home. I'm going to get a good night's sleep. I'm going to drink a lot of water. I'm going to lay my body down. I'm going to have a healthy dinner and a healthy breakfast. And then I'm going to go back to the convention the next day. Because part of it is, as you get older, you both realize that your body can't do it, but then you also realize that you're like, I'm an adult, for God's sakes. I've got to treat this. I've got to treat this like work. I can't just think it's party time USA at the end of a convention. So you've got to get sleep. You've got to invest in a bunch of bottles of water for your convention booth. And you got to go easy on dehydrating liquor at the end of the night. Yeah. And you got to eat right. If you're like me too, when I was in my 20s and 30s, conventions would be 4 days of burgers every day. Yeah. And my first vegetable would be when I got back home from the convention. So it was coffee to get me up in the morning, burgers all day, and then beers at night. Well, that's a recipe for gastric disaster.
Yes, it is.
And I did it for 3-4 days in a row. So now I try to work in a salad or some flipping vegetables, for God's sakes, and some water, a lot of water, and good sleep. And so that's my thought on it. Brad, what is your thought?
Well, I agree. I remember those days that we used to go out afterwards, and we, you know, as you said, it was a good place to pick up tips and tricks. I remember you used to pick up tips, and I used to pick up tricks. But the thing about
oh my God. I want everybody at home to know that Brad was in his studio, leaning forward into his microphone, so excited to use that joke. Like he had been waiting. He had been waiting for 2 minutes. Like, oh, here's what I'm going to do. Here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring back up tips and tricks.
I'm going to bring it back around.
Oh my God. Waiting to use that joke. I could feel it. The sense of excitement as you said that joke.
I was just a split second to interject it when you said it. And then it occurred to me, and it's like, I am not letting that go. I don't believe in wasteful humor. I will, if I got a joke, I'm going to use it.
Palpable excitement for Brad to use that funny joke.
Oh, God.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head. I think you've got to be smart about how you approach these conventions. I think you've got to take care of yourself. Do bring lots of water. Be that person that brings a case of water to a show, and that's probably one of the biggest. Because, like you said, once you start to dry out and then your nose dries out, that's your being totally gross. That's your first line of defense against flu. Is right there up your nose. So stay hydrated, stay rested. Do go out and enjoy a nice little, maybe a beer or two, and then come home and wham the water and go to bed. And take it easy on yourself.
Did you say wham the water?
Yeah. Like wham it down. Wham, wham, wham.
What? I've never heard anyone use that. Wham the water? What the hell?
That might be a family thing, because in my like my in-laws use that phrase all the time too, whamming the water. So maybe it's just maybe it's something is Ohioism.
Is that an Upper Michigan thing? Oh yeah, sure, we're gonna wham the water. Okay.
You heard about Clyde, didn't you? Yeah, he's been whamming the water ever since he lost his driver's license.
It honest to God, it sounds like you're saying someone was having sex with water. Oh yeah, they wham the water.
Well, that was that movie that was so popular this year.
Oh, with the fish man, when the lady has sex with the fish man, yeah.
Before we go too far afield here, Dave, though, this person, I'm just looking up at my notes, and there's a secondary question that I'm dying to get your thoughts on.
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay, he says when he does T-shirts and stuff, okay, along with his comic. Whenever I do a convention, people come up to me and read my T-shirts, posters, and comics on my table out loud to me. At first, it was fun or funny, but after the 3,000th person in a row, it gets a little annoying. And by the way, he didn't say this, but I'll say it for him, especially when they either take a picture of it and walk away or just walk away without buying it. You know, oh my God, that's such a great T-shirt. Hey, come on over here, Clyde, take a look at this T-shirt. Okay, well, we got to go. But he's not saying that that's me. Any good ideas or quips or ways of turning these comments into conversations at a convention? In other words, you're sitting there, you got all this great T-shirts and stuff up there, and people start to interact with it, but at the basest of surface levels. How do you convert that, Dave, into a conversation and eventually a sale?
Wow. I am Johnny doesn't want to go first today, because I want you to tackle that one again. I don't know.
You're really going to see my old man come out. I don't know that there is a way. I don't think that person who wants to come up and take a picture of your T-shirt is ever going to buy a T-shirt. And I think you're probably, tilting at windmills to make it happen. I think you definitely want to throw a little conversation starter out there. Usually when I do is I say, yeah, that's based on this comic that I wrote, or something to that end. And yes, I know it's tiresome when you do that 3,000 times in a row, but that's also what you signed up for when you said you want to come and do a comic convention. You signed up for having 3,000 of exactly the same conversations in a row. And if you want to make the sale, that's what you got to do. But right. I wouldn't expend a lot of thought or energy on it, because I'm going to say 90% of those are surface level conversations. That person is never going to turn into somebody that buys a comic or buys a t-shirt. They are just surface level. And so let them have their fun. You had a brief moment that you spread some joy, and let it be what it's going to be. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time shaking my fist over it, because that's what comic conventions are now. And you knew that when you showed up.
Right. I think one of the reasons why I didn't want to go first on this was my gut told me I didn't have a satisfactory answer.
Yeah.
And you crystallized it so much better than I would have, which is to say that it's exactly like the Instagram followers that Brad was talking about last week, is that there are going to be 10,000 people that follow or disfollow you, unfollow rather, disfollow. Geez Louise.
They disfollow a question asker.
There's going to be 10,000 people that follow and then unfollow you at the whim, at a drop of a hat. And that's going to happen. And you've got to let that happen, because you will crystallize from those 10,000 down to the 1,000 that are true followers on a social media following or on your website. And the same is true with a comics convention. You're going to have 10,000 people pass by with varying degrees of smirks, laughs, enjoyment, sharing it with friends, taking a photo, none of whom are going to dive deep on your work. But you have to allow that to happen, because one or two might go, you know what, actually, as their friend that they've called over comes by, they go, you know what, I would like this shirt or this book or this poster. And so you have to allow for the 100 people to go by so that you get the one that makes the sale.
And I think headspace is important here, because here's the deal. If you get into the headspace that you feel like you've got to convert every one of those people, then you're going to drive yourself crazy. But if you have a couple of standard responses like, yep, that's based on my daily comic, it's at evil-comic.com. You get to the point where you can say that without even devoting a brain cell to it. I used to be able to say this stuff, right? And you know it because you stood next to me listening to it ad nauseum, talking about things that you hated to hear for the 3,000th time. But I could rattle that off without even thinking of it. And it didn't take up any conscious time. I maybe didn't even look up from an artist edition sketch that I was doing at the time. But come up with a couple of those little patter kind of phrases, boilerplate, and throw it out there so that you're doing your part in case there is something there. And if there's no heartbeat and the person walks away, then that's par for the course. Like Dave said, that is very much a part of what this is all about.
Yeah, and I guess before we put a capper on this one thing to also keep in mind is that as you're trying to distill down from the 10,000 people that walk by a booth at a Comic-Con to get to the couple hundred that are going to make a sale, what you also have to remember is that people that walk by that say, "Oh, that's a great T-shirt. Can I take a photo of it?" Or, "Oh, I love that poster. Can I share this with my friend real quick?" In a way, that's also signs that you're on the right path. That it's getting a reaction. People like what you're putting out there. It is just worth keeping that in mind, that it is frustrating on the road to making a sale at a convention that you are getting compliments. And so on a basic human level, just go, all right, this is doing all right. This is good. I'm on the right path.
That's such a good point, because here's another way of saying it. These people could be walking by and saying nothing. And there's nothing worse than that.
Yes, that's a great way to counterweight that. Yeah,
it's terrible to have the same conversation 3,000 times in a row. You know what's even worse? Having no conversation 3,000 times in a row.
Yeah, that is a really brilliant capstone to put on that, Brad. I think there's no better way to put that. Yes, very exactly. Good. At least you're getting a reaction. And so you're on the right path. And so it's just a question of having more things at your table that will draw someone's eye so that they stick around, which is equivalent for your website. You'll have one or two viral hits, and the idea is to get 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 viral hits so that there's a lot of different people coming to get eyeballs on your work.
Absolutely. Oh, do you hear that music?
I do hear that music.
Means you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been the avuncular Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And the lovable, huggable, squishable Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And don't think I didn't hear that squishable. I get it. I'm going on a diet next week.
I like that squishy dog faces thing.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab, so we'll go ahead and say that twice. patreon.com/comiclab. Doctor, if you wouldn't mind looking at my Winkerbean. My wife says it's getting a slight bit funky. Well, tell me this. After sex, do you notice a slight drabble?